How is everyone tonight?
Great. How are you?
I am good. Thank you.
Thank you so much for meeting with us.
It's my pleasure.
Katie, you can start the recording. I know that you're familiar with the League, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about what our study committee is doing. We're looking at our education position and studying it and determining what areas we want to change or not in it, and make it as relevant as we can for the immediate time being in the future. And we have been meeting as a committee since about last March. And of course, the pandemic threw us a loop, but then we started meeting virtually. And we have determined that we do want to ground the position in a statement around equity. And so we've been building other statements specifically around equity. And of course, we had a lot of questions about finance, and someone suggested that you would be really good to talk about the connections between local and state financing and how that affects schools. So that's sort of where I generated a lot of questions I know that you got, but I can read them again if you want. But I'm going to introduce you first, since Gladys sent me a nice intro for you. First elected to the Texas House of Representatives in 2016, Gina Hinojosa represents House District 49, which covers the Central Austin corridor. The 86th legislative session marked Gina's second legislative session. She was appointed to serve as vice chair of the Human Services Committee and as a member of the Defense and Veterans Affairs Committee. This past legislative session, Gina is proud to have passed legislation and budget riders focused on improving women's reproductive health care, maternal mortality data collection, special education oversight, disaster preparedness, and disaster relief services. During her first session, Gina earned the title of Freshman Floor Fighter of the Year from Capitol Inside, Mexican American Legislative Caucus, Freshman of the Year Award 2017 Legislative Champion from the Texas Women's Healthcare Coalition, and Defender of Justice from the Texas Fair Defense Project, as she stood up to ensure the voices of HD 49 were vigorously represented. Before serving as a member of the Texas House, Gina was elected to an at-large position on the AISD School Board in November 2012. Thereafter, she was elected board president by her fellow trustees in January 2015. Throughout her career, Gina volunteered with Austin Interfaith and was a key leader in the organization's successful efforts to require corporations that receive economic incentives from the city to pay their employees a living wage or higher. Gina came to Austin to attend the University of Texas at Austin and graduated with honors with a Plan 2 Government Bachelor of Arts degree. She attended law school at the George Washington University Law School and was licensed to practice law in 1999. Representative Hinojosa, if you would just like to talk around any of the questions or identify for yourself what are the things that you feel are most important to bring up to our committee as we think about how we want to make our position statement as vital as we can when we are advocating locally.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, great. So now moved into another room in my house. Hopefully I get better connectivity here. I'm sorry, I missed part of what you were, if you had a specific question, did you want me just to give an overview on education issues and for this coming session?
Yes, that would be great. I'll read the questions again. What legislation that affects local education is coming up that we should be paying attention to? That was one.
Okay.
What legislation should we anticipate supporting this session? What legislation could negatively affect funding support for education? How does the COVID-19 pandemic affect legislative priorities for education? In general, how has the pandemic redrawn the ways we need to address equity in education? So those are a lot of questions. Whatever you feel is most pertinent to address is great.
Well, I come at this from the perspective of a legislator, but that perspective is heavily influenced by my experience as a parent. I have a child in 3rd grade at an AISD school, and a child, or my son is a freshman in high school. And so that influences how I think about this. And I'll say that my experience is we cannot pretend that things are normal, that circumstances are normal, and try to make the way we used to do education before the pandemic work in a pandemic environment. By that, I mean, parents are under extreme stress for economic reasons, for just pandemic mental health reasons, job reasons, health reasons. People are losing loved ones in their families. Parents are scared, and all this affects kids, and kids are scared, and kids are stressed. And so I come at this understanding that yes, kids are losing valuable educational kind of enrichment, right? There's the COVID slide that we hear about, where we know especially kids from low income families are losing, are not keeping up with educational attainment that they would have in non-pandemic times. But these are also human beings. Kids are human beings too, and I really am concerned that we are looking out for their mental health as well as their education. So I had a meeting today, the Travis County delegation that falls within Austin ISD's boundaries, met with the superintendent today and talked to them about what is happening. I'll tell you right now, our schools are all remote in Austin, in Austin ISD. The superintendent made the decision that for the week after Thanksgiving, all our schools would go remote because Dr. Escott with Austin Public Health advised this so that she might have a chance to open up schools for the next 2 weeks. He said, look, families are coming back from Thanksgiving gatherings, and they're not going to have enough time to know who's infected before going back to school. But if we can have that week where everyone's tested, and Austin ISD is doing a lot of that testing at its schools, if we can have that time to test people know if they're sick, that's really going to help to keep COVID out of schools, right? Well, the commissioner denied Austin ISD's request to do this, and she's chosen, Dr. Elizalde has chosen to do it anyway. And as a result, the commissioner has said she will not receive full funding, and she will only receive half funding for this week of school. So that outrages me. I mean, we should be able to make decisions in a pandemic based on medical science from the experts in the field. And right now our hands are tied. So a lot of the problem that we're having in our schools comes from these mandates from the state that take away a lot of local control and don't trust communities, don't trust parents, don't trust teachers, don't trust superintendents, local school boards to make decisions based on the circumstances in their communities about how to best educate kids. So today I decided we're filing a bill on this issue, and we're looking at how we, at minimum say when there is an emergency declaration by the governor and the school district makes a decision based on advice from the local public health authority, to deliver education in a different way, that they should not be penalized with funding consequences. But we also are filing a bill that says we should not have to take the STAR test during a pandemic. The STAR test is designed to rank schools against one another and districts against one another for accountability purposes. You know, the STAR test is graded on a curve so that we'll always have the same percentage of schools not meet standards, right? And so it really is about ranking schools against one another, comparing schools against one another. Not appropriate for this time. And the way teachers and students and parents are struggling to just get in their classroom, whether it's remote classroom or in-person classroom, the education they have to get in, the content they have to get in, the engagement they have to get in to teach students, that time is so much more precious now than it's ever been. And I just think it's ridiculous we're fooling around with a state accountability test when we're in a pandemic and we don't have bandwidth for that. We don't need to put that extra stress on the system, not to mention on the kids. We know from studies that this is already a very stressful test on kids. And my son is in 3rd grade, took this new test called the MAPS test this year, was on this test for 3 days during a week, hours taken up, where it's for the purpose of diagnostics. So we don't need to take another test that was not made for the purpose of diagnosing what needs to be done in our schools, but it was made for the purpose of accountability and comparing our schools. We don't need to take that test for a reason that it wasn't designed for, when we have another test we've already taken that is designed to do just that. So we have a bill that says, don't give the STAR during a pandemic, or at least request a waiver from the Department of Education Commissioner, who is Betsy DeVos at the moment, so that you don't have to take this test. And at minimum, we know we don't have to apply it we don't have to use it in our accountability system. And we should really take a timeout on our state accountability system, on our high stakes accountability system right now. Funding, we passed record funding last session with House Bill 3, and I was very proud to have been a part of that. And our priority is to ensure that we keep that funding. I will tell you that keeping our schools funded, fully funded is not the correct term, because we still have a lot to do. But at minimum, when you make cuts, it hurts the lowest income families first. I will tell you, for my own kids, I have hired a tutor for my high schooler to help him, because you may have read in the news, lots of kids are failing right now. It's hard to engage kids in this remote learning in the middle of a pandemic. It's just, we all are having a hard time focusing on what we used to focus on. Kids are no different. And so I've hired a tutor for my high schooler. I was not able to get the school district to give my son a test to evaluate him for special education, even though both myself and my son's teacher recommended it. We waited for almost a year, couldn't get testing. So we paid lots of money to get our own testing, right? When you don't fund your schools, the people with resources will get the resources they need. It's the people, it's the families who don't have those resources that are really relying on us to get it right. And it's really hard, and not impossible, to do that when we are not fully funding our schools. So we're going to be fighting to keep that funding. I think that we are in a different circumstance than we were in 2011, when the legislature made those drastic cuts because of the recession to our public schools, because of the political fight that we had in the last two elections. Democrats are putting up a really strong fight now in our elections. And while we didn't pick up seats this time, I believe in part the reason why some of our Republican members were able to keep their jobs is because they came back and said, hey, we gave your schools more money in House Bill 3. And so I just think that nobody politically wants to go back on the commitment we made to our students and schools in House Bill 3 last time. That being said, the TEA has already proposed a 5% cut to its budget, as it was requested to do by the governor. All agencies were requested to do this. It's not a cut to what is called formula funding in the money we get per student, but cuts to other programs like career technology education in the summer programs, those kinds of things is where the TEA is proposing cuts. So already there are cuts proposed, but we are going to fight against that and try to minimize that as much as possible. I filed a bill that's gotten some attention to elect our TEA commissioner. And really what I wanted to do with that bill is to start a conversation about how we have a commissioner appointed by the governor who is right now, if you talk to school board members and you talk to superintendents across the state, will tell you he has the power of God. He is making all sorts of decisions. There are dictates that he proposes on a phone, or that he announces on a phone. They're not written anywhere. It's real. There's no transparency in the process, and we need to have some transparency and accountability when it comes to these decisions. So I don't have high hopes that this bill is going to get very far, but it is prompting conversation about how we definitely need more transparency and more accountability when it comes to his decisions. One of the big challenges that we have in school funding is that charter schools are taking more and more of our public education dollars. Charter schools don't get funded the same way our ISDs do. They get funded, they receive about over $1,000 more per student than most ISDs receive per student. I'm sorry, let me put that a different way. Than most students who are in ISDs get. And that's a different thing. We have a whole bunch of ISDs, but most of our kids are not in these whole bunch. Most of our kids are in the few urbans, right? That's where most of the Texas school kids are. So, so if you look at those urbans, especially in Austin, it's over $1,200 more per student. I think no, it's over 1,000. I think it's about 1,200 more per student or maybe 1,300. Actually, 1,300 seems right, that they get per student, and they don't have to take all kids. So I'm refiling a bill that passed unanimously out of committee last session that says charter schools, you cannot keep kids out who have a disciplinary record. You can't exclude them from admissions because of their disciplinary record. Currently, today, some of the big charter schools will deny consideration of a student's application because this child has been to the principal's office. Both my sons have been to the principal's office. Is not, our public schools need to take all kids. Otherwise, what's the point? If you're only going to educate the easy kids, and not kids who are the more challenging ones like mine, then what's the point? But kind of all joking aside, we know when these exclusions are made based on disciplinary record that oh, wait, are you there? Can y'all see me? Okay.
You're good.
We know that when these decisions are made, they disproportionately exclude boys of color and kids who are in special education, receiving special education. Those are the kids that are overrepresented in school disciplinary actions. So there is a discriminatory effect of that kind of policy. That's all too common. We also have a bill that says charter schools, you cannot be kicking out kids for any reason that our ISDs can't kick them out. Also aligning discipline there. One big issue that the pandemic has exposed is the need for broadband access. Now, thankfully, some of my rural Republican colleagues are taking a lead on that. They are really experiencing the hardship in their communities of not having broadband access when they need to go to remote schooling. But we know that that also is a big issue in urban areas. And it's not just about paying it, though part of the big problem is paying for internet access, and not all families can afford that, many cannot. But it's also having somebody who has the computer literacy to be able to help a child navigate the assignments at home. I'll tell you, I was up till 10 p.m. last night trying to figure out how to get my third graders' assignments turned in, because they were on these different applications, and I eventually figured it out. But even someone like me who is, somewhat savvy when it comes to technology, I struggle to keep up. And so we know that's not fair. We shouldn't have an education system that's that really is not only grading students on their parents' ability to navigate computers, but that's also where a child's education is dependent on that. And so I don't know exactly what the answer is to that. And we are convening, the delegation is convening stakeholders, groups that work on public education statewide on Thursday to talk about, all right, what are your biggest challenges, and what can we do to help fix them? Because we need to think outside the box right now. I don't believe that the way we're experiencing remote learning, where a teacher right now in AISD, a teacher is responsible to do remote learning at the same time as classroom learning. Teachers have kids in the class at the same time as they're doing remote learning, and delivering that educational content, it is so different when it comes to in-person versus online. And so teachers are essentially doing two jobs at once. And I think it's just to be honest, a disservice to everyone, to the teacher who's doubly tired trying to figure all this out, parents having now have kids who are getting remote education are shouldering more of the burden, and kids who are showing up in the classroom are also getting less of what they need because the teacher is stretched. So we just need to be able to figure out a better way. And I very much believe part of what is in the way of figuring out a better way are these mandates from the TEA that are making things very difficult. So I had my notes on my computer before that I'm not on anymore since I'm on my phone, but that's what comes. Those are the priorities that come to mind right now for this session. I'm happy. Are there any questions?
None in the chat yet.
At this time, if anyone wants to ask a question or make a comment, that would be fine.
What about reworking recapture? This popped up on my screen. Well, we did rework it last session with House Bill 3, where we now get to keep a greater percentage of the money of property taxes for our own kids, a substantial amount. I don't have the amount off the top of my head, but I will say that we are a wealthy school district and we will always need to share. I think that it has been out of whack in the past, and we have had to give up more than was fair. But we made strides, taken great strides to help fix that last session. And it's hard to know because the pandemic's hit and it's kind of things are not operating as normal. It's hard to know how that's all shaken out. Since we've done that, hold on one. I need you to turn the TV down, please. Turn the TV down, please. Sorry about that. I've got a TV babysitter right now for my third grader. So I myself was educated in Brownsville, Texas. I went to Title I schools. It was a Title I community. I don't think we had any schools that weren't Title I. Everybody was on free or reduced lunch, if not free lunch. And I understand the needs of a property poor community I think that all children are entitled to a quality public education, regardless of what their community can afford. That being said, I do think things had been out of whack. I'm glad we were able to bring substantial money back home. I don't think the verdict is yet in on whether that was sufficient, because the pandemic's hit and thrown everything out of whack.
Does anyone from the study committee want to make a comment or add a question? I can see that there are a few people here from our study committee. I know I was very responsive, when you were talking about how stressed out everybody is and that it's unfair to everybody. And the teachers are trying to do 2 jobs. I can't imagine doing that. I just can't imagine how difficult that is. And how hard it must be to try to keep up with something like the standardized tests. That just seems like an impossible monkey wrench to be throwing into this time period. Do you think that there's any sense coming from the TEA and anybody else who's a player in how these things get determined, that it would be okay to let go of some of these structures and expectations and try to make the best possible year for the most people?
Well, I think there's a good chance that the commissioner will choose not to use the STAR test for accountability purposes, because at this point, even his allies have said that's not right. And there was a public letter last week or the week before, I think, from some people who are aligned in terms, some groups that are aligned in terms like the chambers of commerce, aligned in terms of their educational philosophies, are even saying, yeah, this is not right. Don't use it for this purpose. But they are saying give the test so we can get the data. I think we just need to remember here, it's not like we're getting data from widgets or from books. We're getting data from students, and they're already under so much pressure and stress. And we need to remember the human element here. So I am not forgiving the test at all. And we sent the governor, we put out a petition. Over 700, close to 800 people signed the petition saying request of Betsy DeVos to please cancel the STAR test. We haven't heard, but then there was 60 some legislators signed a letter to the governor to say, don't cancel the STAR test, at minimum, don't use it for accountability purposes. And so I think there's a good chance it will still be given, but not used for accountability system. But it's going to be a mess, because how do you give a test like that when you have some kids home, some kids at school? You don't know who's going to be where when. We have lost contact with a substantial number, at least based on AISD's data from the spring semester last school year. They lost contact with like 12% of kids. I mean, it is a pandemic. There is a reason we are operating under an emergency declaration of the governor right now. This is not normal times. And I know we all really want it to be, but it is just not. And it will get there, but we're just not there right now. And I'm all for, once we get there, do we test students to find out how far behind they are? Once kids are back in the classroom and we've resumed some kind of normal, sure, yeah, but we're not there. And I think we need to be compassionate about how we're interacting with our kids and what requirements we're putting on them.
I have a question about the whole STAR testing and accountability. I never realized that it's graded on a curve. I find that shocking. The whole idea of these tests is to have some sort of a standard that you compare to, not comparing schools to each other.
Yeah, isn't right?
I find that absolutely appalling.
I just learned that a couple of years ago, and I think most people don't know that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is. So we know there will always be schools,
Yeah,
and students who don't make the mark, who don't meet the standard, because we will always keep raising it based on how well students do.
exactly.
Isn't that crazy? I know, it's terrible. Let me tell you, this is the one unifier. Republicans and Democrats alike hate the STAR test. Everybody hates the STAR test, except for, I think there's been support by some chambers, in kind of some in the business community, who like to see, who want to make sure we are getting returns on our investment. I think that's maybe what it is. There are some people known as kind of education reformers who are supportive of this kind of thing. There is the argument of leaving no child behind, right? And how we need to make sure, if we didn't have something like this, then we would have lower standards for poor kids or minority kids. And I do think that there is concern there, but and I think it's worthwhile, but I think at the same time it's worthwhile to explore another way to do this, because I agree. I don't think it's right that there will always be kids that's graded on a curve like that. I just don't think that's right. And we know that there was an analysis by educational experts a couple years ago, or it was during last session, that showed that the STAR is not aligned with the educational standards of the TEKS, I think it was. In other words, the STAR is testing for a higher level of educational attainment than is appropriate for the grade level. So that's a problem too. This is a stressful test. It stresses everyone out during normal times for good reason. And I just think we need a new way.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking about what our education position might be as we're trying to, that has come up. But something you said a minute ago about once things get back to so-called normal and kids are actually attending school, to use it to see where we are as a kind of diagnostic is a really different purpose than using it to rank order school systems or schools, or however it's done, individual schools, school systems, whatever. So it seems to me that, we might be trying to talk about that in the long run as well as the short run, if you think that would be useful.
Well, yeah, and who one of my go-to experts is on testing is Laura Yeager. Is she on this call? I don't even know. I know she's been a member of the league in the past, but today, because it had not even occurred to me that we are already giving this new test called the MAPS test to our kids that's supposed to be diagnostic. So I'm not sure why we need to give this other test that wasn't designed for this. Why that's not good enough. Why? So, and I had just decided today I need to call Laura and see what she knows about this, because she's done a lot of work focusing on testing. And so I need to dig into that a little more.
Why are charter schools multiplying? What will happen to our public schools is one comment and question. And then there's another one. I'm only familiar with pre-K, second grade mandates in terms of assessment. However, something to consider is the importance of capturing this assessment data so that teachers can accurately inform individualized instruction. It does seem difficult, however, for families unfamiliar with how this platforms work. I wonder how you can keep assessment vendors accountable for this part of the issue. Then there's another question. What has the reaction been among your colleagues to your bill that would call on the Commissioner of Education to become an office?
Well, I haven't heard much from my colleagues on the electing the commissioner part. And I think I have heard from another organization. I can't remember who it was. I don't want to say the wrong group, about, well, what if instead we, some have said, let's make it a nonpartisan election. I like that idea, and I'm exploring how to do that. Some have said maybe instead make it, instead of one person, a kind of commission where there are several appointments. And so then at least it's a deliberative body that has to have public discussion about decisions, policy decisions. And so that creates that transparency. That also would be preferable to what we have today. Some have said, what if instead the State Board of Education, the commissioner answered to the State Board of Education? Also, all these ideas are better than what we currently have. And so I haven't heard from colleagues about this, but again, the point is to just start the conversation. And I think these are some good ideas that have emerged. About charter schools, Vicki Goodwin has filed a bill that, so right now the way charters work is a charter organization applies to get an application from the state to have a public charter, to open up a charter school, right? So let me give you the example of, let's say, KIPP charter. KIPP applied to the State Board of Education to get a charter to open its very first charter school. Once that is approved by the State Board of Education, KIPP and any other charter school group that has a state charter can open up multiple charter schools across the state with just the approval of the commissioner. So no longer is the State Board of Education involved. It is now just this one person who makes a decision about whether or not to approve charters. And these are very expensive decisions the commissioner is making. He approved a number of charters this last summer, despite pleas from communities about, don't do this, we're going to lose funding. We need this funding now more than ever. And so, yes, it is a real concern. Vicki Goodwin has a bill that takes that sole discretion away from the commissioner. So the way, again, you apply for a charter from the State Board of Education, you get amendments to the charter from the commissioner, and the amendment, you get an amendment for every school. So it's an amendment. I want to open up a school in Central Austin. That's one amendment. I want to open up a school on Rumberg. That's another amendment. So those amendments are approved by the commissioner. And I don't know the number of that bill. Somebody, I think, just asked about the bill number on that. Gladys probably.
Somebody
Oh,
just
Carrie.
put it here, HB, this
Okay.
must be Carrie, HB 438.
Okay.
Is that Carrie who put that in? Yeah. Oh, Laura Atlas Kravitz,
It's
sorry.
my colleague. Yeah, it's my colleague. But yeah.
Okay.
Okay, great. Yeah. So that's a good bill. That's important. The State Board of Education, it takes a more measured approach about expanding these charters and looks at all sorts of things. For instance, we saw lots of financial concerns raised about IDEA public schools this last summer, and questions being asked. And those are the kinds of issues that the State Board of Education really kind of brings to light and hears about and deliberates about. And I think these are public tax dollars. We're talking, I mean, again, for every charter school that opens, they're getting over $1,000 per student that we're on the hook to pay for now. And there's no consideration about, are there a bunch of other high performing schools in the neighborhood, or are there other, why do we need this? Whenever a school district opens a new school, we have to make the case to voters as to why we are spending public money to build a new school. When I was on the school board, we had to do this. We want a new school over in this area because of overcrowding. Let's hear public testimony, but the commissioner, just without having to consider any of those things, and it's pretty evident none of those things are considered, makes the decision to spend all this public money without any justification as to why it's necessary. And in fact, in the face of very good arguments about why it is not a good idea, he chooses to do it anyway. So I share the concern about a parallel school system that is taking public education dollars and not taking all kids. I share that concern. So we're working.
Representative Hinojosa, we have two other questions in the chat. So the other question was in regards to how can you keep assessment vendors accountable? And this is in regards to capturing assessment data so that teachers can accurately instruction.
Well, again, I think we need to remember what these tests are for. And the STAR test is not meant to be diagnostic. So I don't think that has anything to do with the vendor. I think that has to do with policymakers deciding what test. And to be clear, the federal government does require an assessment. So, and we chose the STAR in Texas, right? So in some ways that's a federal issue. That's originally started as No Child Left Behind, then that was amended to be, I'm blanking on the federal legislation that replaced No Child Left Behind, but same kind of federal mandates to have a test for a standardized test. So I'm not sure about how else we would hold vendors accountable. I think that we need to be holding the TEA accountable to make sure we're spending money on testing only when it's needed and only when it's appropriate. And I don't feel like we're doing that right now.
And
We sent the commissioner a letter before the contracts were finalized for STAR testing this year in the summer. We asked him, please, you could use that money for broadband. You can use, there are all sorts of needs we could use that money on. And so, but that no action was taken.
All right. And then another question. In terms of what the community can do to push back on TEA and Governor Abbott, should we keep contacting them, or is it a waste of our time? And we ask this because we're tired of fighting. I like to think of this as, how can we support your TEA commissioner bill?
Well, okay, so look, I'll tell you, I talked to a school board member in the state of Texas today. I'm not going to say which school board because they're scared. They are afraid to push back because they fear retaliation. We don't have that fear. It takes our time. I mean, yeah, probably I'll be retaliated against in some way, but I don't care. Not the same way that the school districts are retaliated against. We have the freedom to be able to say what is on our minds, and they don't. So what I told the school board member, get your parents engaged on this issue. Push back through your parents. I think it is true that school districts are in real danger. I mean, gosh, the commissioner is trying to take over Houston ISD, right? It's just, the commissioner has incredible authority and no qualms about using it. So there is real good reason for our school districts to be circumspect with the way they push back and whether they push back. But we don't have those concerns. And so I say yes, put it on your social media. Again, these are things that resonate with all parties. You can't do it right now because Facebook has well, you all probably could. If you have any money to spend on Facebook ads, I do, they're so cheap. And I do Facebook ads on public education issues all the time saying, sign this, and I'll target statewide parents or statewide teachers, because you can choose who your audience is. But these issues need more exposure. You know, I heard from our superintendent a couple months ago, well, I'm going to have to require all the teachers to come back to schools because the TEA commissioner because the TEA is requiring that all students have access to their teacher of record right now. Well, I said, well, send me what they sent you. Let me look into it. Well, they told us over the phone. I asked TEA, what are you pointing to? Well, we never said that. We just pointed to this frequently asked question answer when we talked to them on the phone, but we never said that. There's just no transparency. And so people don't know what's happening. And I think that the league can be a tremendous resource to parents, to community members who support education, just to let them know what is happening. Just like was expressed about, I didn't know the star was on the curve. Guarantee you 90%, if not more, of Texans don't know, of parents probably don't know that the star is graded on the curve. I don't even know if teachers know that, or that the star is graded on the curve. So I think the league can be a tremendous resource just to help educate people about what's going on. That's a lot of what I do when I file bills, is try to just educate Texans about what I know to be happening. This charter discipline bill, nobody knew this was happening. When I first got elected to the legislature, I heard a rumor this was happening, and we started to scratch the surface that really can charters exclude kids because they have a disciplinary record? Even the TEA told me, no, they cannot. And sure enough, we found in statute that they were explicitly excluded from requirements for having to do this. I don't think the TEA was, I don't think that they were being dishonest. I think they just really didn't know. And so, but now a lot of people know about this. And first session we filed the bill, we couldn't even get it voted out of committee. Last session, we got it voted unanimously out of committee. It takes a long time. These are things that don't happen in one session. I'm kind of spearheading a Texas climate plan effort. Do I think that we're going to make progress this session on a Texas climate plan? No, I don't. But these are things, are we going to start educating people about it? Yeah, we are. And eventually, might we get there? We might. But I think that's why your role is so valuable, because people trust you all to just deliver facts, and they know you're supporters of our public schools. So I would say, please keep writing letters, keep putting information out, because not everyone feels like they have the liberty, the freedom to do that.
Our next question, I'm concerned that giving more power to the SBOE will not be in our best interest. They weren't even able to pass the topic of consent for the updated health TEKS.
Yes, I know. I mean, the State Board of Education is not, does not share our values on I'll say my values on a lot of things, and as a majority of the body. But there were members who did fight for those things on the State Board of Education. At the same time, they are more responsive to community than the commissioner, because they at least have to deliberate. And you have now, we have a little bit more. We just elected and I say we, my party, the party I belong to, we now have another Democrat on the State Board of Education. And while things aren't, and that was a big deal that they didn't vote to do that. And I was very disappointed about that. There was a robust fight. It was public. People were aware, more than has happened before. So while no, it's not, it is not anywhere close to ideal, I do still think it is I think it would be better than what we have now, because we just have very little transparency and accountability with the commissioner making all these decisions kind of by himself, and just announcing them from on high, essentially.
All right, thank you. We think that we came up with the phrase you were looking for earlier, every student succeeds.
Yes, that's right. Every Student Succeeds Act. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, so our next question is kind of a good summary of what we've been discussing. So why do charter schools receive more funding per student? We don't understand why charter schools are taking over the education system.
Okay, so the reason why they get more funding is because, I don't even know if it was intended this way, but it has had this effect. So charter schools get the state average of what they take all the school districts in the state and they average out what those school districts get. And that's what a charter school gets in their per pupil funding. Now, the reason why that ends up being more than what most students get is because, again, most students are in the urbans. We have, I don't even know, like over 1,000 school districts in the state of Texas. We have but a lot of them are itty bitty school districts, and they get a bump in their funding because they get what's known as the small to mid-size allotment, the small school allotment. So in other words, the legislature at one point made a decision that a smaller school district could not operate at the kind of economies of scale that a larger school district could operate at. And so they needed to get a per student bump in funding. So they get more per student than kind of more base funding per student than in an urban area. Now, but so if you take an average of all the students, that's higher than what the urban school districts get, and that's where most of the kids are. What would make more sense is if charter schools, because remember, some of these charter schools are giant, like the ones where, I mean, Idea, Kit, Harmony, these schools, these are where most of the charter kids are. These are giant, I mean, they're by no means small school districts. It would make more sense if they got an average of what all the students are, because if you did an average of all the students, that would align them with more with the urbans. It would be more fair. And again, that's where the students are. Vast majority of our students in the state of Texas in public schools are in urban school districts because they're so big. So that would make more sense. At this point, though, the charters have probably are one of the, at minimum, the top 5 most well-funded charter lobbies at the Capitol. And we have political donors of like, for instance, the heiress to the Walmart chain, who is a big charter school proponent and does weigh in with the governor and with legislators about protecting charter school growth. They're big proponents of charter schools. And so there's big money behind the charter policy. The other thing is some of these charter schools, and we're seeing more and more of this where the charter school itself, we don't have for-profit charters in the state of Texas. You have to be a nonprofit to get a charter in the state of Texas. But you can have a for-profit management company. So, and you can have your building be owned by a for-profit entity. And so what we're seeing more and more is for-profit management companies that are being hired by these charters, and also there being financial incentive for these charter schools, because they acquire more and more property, and then that property is owned by private entities. So I mean, it's you really have to, there are some people who have done the work kind of to follow the money and do the digging. It's really hard. It's not transparent, but more and more we're learning that there are definitely financial incentives to charter growth that some people have. Also, you need to remember that charter schools spend less on education than our ISDs. They spend more on management. They're like the IDEA superintendent was one of the highest paying superintendents in the whole state, made more than urban superintendents. And so a lot of these superintendents get paid more. Their management teams get paid more. They spend more on management than the ISDs. They just don't have the same level of accountability. People will say charter schools are accountable only because they're required to take the STAR test and they're in the state accountability system. But when you're a charter school and you're compared to an ISD school in the state accountability system, and you don't have to take the kids who cause trouble because you can exclude the kids with disciplinary records, then how is it fair to compare those kids to the kids in ISDs, or to compare not the kids but the schools with one another? That is what we do right now. And it's one way in which our accountability system is messed up. I'll tell you another way that doesn't have anything to do with charters. Right now, we'll take a school like Ann Richards, which is a school that I love, but is a choice school, right? we'll take a choice school and we are comparing it with a neighborhood school in terms of accountability purposes, which is not right. It's not fair, right? Because you have a different population of kids. You have kids who have applied to get into Ann Richards. There's some, either the student is motivated or the families are motivated. Somehow they had the edge to be able to apply to get in accepted, yet they're just one example. There are lots of schools of choice within different districts. And I also think it's just not, it's not just not fair, but it hides, it doesn't serve our purposes really to compare these schools against one another. And the purpose is to figure out, are you providing appropriate education for our kids? We know that that these test scores are correlated to family income, and so it just kind of skews the data we're trying to ascertain.
I noticed that we're just a little bit past 7:30, so I think it's time to wrap up. I promised everybody this would just be an hour, and we really appreciate all of the information that you have given us. I've taken a lot of notes, and I think it's going to really help us focus our position statement, and it also gives us some ideas for advocacy that are really good. So thank you very much. Do you have any final comments before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I want to just stress how much I rely on you all and appreciate you all to help us do the work. A lot of these issues, they don't get one on the House floor, they get one in communities, in kind of the realm of public opinion, and you all can do a lot to help with that. So I want you to remember, it sometimes you start to feel like maybe nobody's listening, maybe it's not worth it, but it is, and we rely on it. So I just want to say thank you and how much we rely on you.
Well, thank you. And I think that you made a really good point about advocacy being just a matter of sharing information. We don't have to be biased, pro or con for a bill. We're just sharing information. Did you know that? That kind of thing. Yeah, so that's a really good idea. Well, thank you. This has been great.
Well, thank you all. I appreciate you.
Okay.
Take care and stay safe.
Okay.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you too. Bye.